G'day, chaps. Is I, Clumpuncher139.
If you're watching this, I'm dead.
It has been over 2 years since Gotham Knights released, and if not for a certain other superhero game coming out last year, practically everyone would have forgotten about it, including myself. When I first played the game for my review, that was the only time that I played it. I have not touched Gotham Knights since release. It's just been sitting on my shelf collecting dust this whole time. So I think it's about time to change that, especially with the surge of memes flowing in after that other game released.
Perhaps I treated you too harshly.
Everyone says that we were too harsh on Gotham Knights because Suicide Squad is just so much worse. Compared to that Superman 64 level dumpster fire, Gotham Knights might as well be the next Half-Life 2. The problem being that I don't think anyone making those memes played either game in the first place. So it's time to ask, were we all too harsh on this game, or were we not harsh enough? I think there's only one way to find out. Welcome to the 2-year retrospective of Gotham Knights. Let's get this section out of the way right now because it's where the fewest of my thoughts change on the game. First and foremost, it's not Arkham, meaning the delicately balanced free flow that created one of the most perfect melee combat systems we all know and love is not here. What we have instead is the baseline idea of what Arkham combat is and nothing more. And what we're left with is one of the most generic, uninspired combat systems I've played for a superhero game. Arkham combat is all about bouncing between enemies in a lovely rhythmic flow. Deadpool is all about gun fu and ripping enemies to shreds. Spider-Man is all about acrobatics and using your aerial advantage to throw enemies around. Gotham Knights, you hit enemy, they go down. There's practically nothing unique to go off of here. The only character with even a semblance of interesting gameplay is Red Hood, because he falls under that Deadpool umbrella of using gun fu, mixing his melee and ranged attacks together. But even then, it's such a barren system that doesn't expand on the ideas it presented at all. It is the most functioning combat system of all time. It exists to create gameplay that never really goes any further than punch enemy, enemy falls. And again, they have the idea of what makes a good combat system there and ready. They have a critical strike system built in for every character that rewards more careful and patient gameplay. The problem is that I still have no idea how they ever intended anyone to actually use it. The idea is that you press the attack button the moment your attack lands to start the next one and deal critical damage on your strike. The problem with that idea is that you never know when your attack is going to strike. Animations and sound effects are all over the place during attack combos, meaning it could be anywhere from 30 frames to 120 frames before your attack actually lands without any consistency. Every time it looks like your character is going to attack right away, they instead decide to do a pointless spin that doubles the animation time of the attack, meaning you can't land the crit. Getting good at this system would pretty much require you to completely memorize your character's attack combo and know exactly when the attack is meant to land to do a critical hit. If it was more like Arkham, where the crit was applied immediately after your attack lands to create a sort of rhythm, it would be so much better. Instead, the game feels like a constant button masher where I'm trying to time my hit correctly, and sometimes getting that nice yellow text that says I did, but I still have no idea how. Button mashing is a genuine strategy in this game, because there's no punishment for trying to attack too early, and if the game just happens to register your input at the right time, we just take those. It's such an ass-backwards system that just doesn't make any sense. And I'm still wondering what the hell they were thinking with the grab mechanic in this game. You can only grab enemies when they're on low health, and upon doing so, you only get two options for what to do with them: attack to instantly knock them out, or throw. And frankly, neither option is all that satisfying to do. If you use your grab to do a knockout, then what was even the point of grabbing the enemy to begin with? You can only grab enemies when they're in red HP, which in most cases is going to mean that you're 1 or 2 hits away from knocking them out anyway. Why bother going for the slow grab to knockout animation if you were guaranteed to knock them out with the regular strike anyway? And throwing isn't that much better, because this throw has absolutely no force behind it. You basically just shove the enemy in a direction and they stumble for half a second. And I hate to have to do this, but remember Arkham Knight? You know how every single critical counter would send enemies flying across the screen? Yeah, I miss those days. In this game, the only chance you have to throw enemies into obstacles is if you're right next to them, which, isn't exactly optimal when you're trying to throw the guy into an explosive barrel and you need to stand right next to said barrel to be able to throw him far enough, thus making yourself collateral damage for the explosion and losing half your health bar. And on top of all of that, by the end game, you're only going to be fighting enemies that can't be grabbed, either because they're bosses, they're too big, or because they're ninjas who just decide not to let you grab them. So it's just like, what's the point of still having the mechanic if you're not going to let me use it during the last major section of your game? If they wanted this mechanic to work, they should have implemented some kind of stun mechanic, where doing enough consistent damage to an enemy would leave them stunned, and therefore open to grab. Also, maybe make the throw actually feel good to use instead of just a casual shove. In a similar vein, the targeting for this game is absolutely awful. I can almost never hit who I actually want to in a combat section, which is very unoptimal for a game where hitting the right enemy at the right time could mean life and death. I'm very clearly trying to hit this explosive pack to stun this big group of enemies, but the targeting is fighting me the entire way, hitting literally everyone else, denying me my big finishing blow, and now everyone has bum rushed me. This is especially egregious against the Talons, who require a specific attack to make vulnerable. Half the time, I'll be trying to aim in the middle of a large group of them to take them all down at once. Then, for some ungodly reason, my character will literally aim anywhere else to target a single one and screw up my plan. Which, whatever, could be fine if the attack was useful outside of stunning Talons, but it's not. It's the single most useless attack whose only purpose is stunning Talons. It does pitiful damage against regular enemies and has the range of a regular melee hit, despite being classified as a powerful, ranged attack. It's also slow as balls, meaning you're more than likely going to get hit out of it. I get having an attack that's meant to be used on a specific enemy type. Arkham did it with the aerial attack. The difference is that the aerial attack is still good outside of its one intended use against shield enemies. The burst range attack in Gotham Knights is not. Honestly, the only thing that works really well in combat is dodging. And I only say that because if it didn't work this well, we'd have a massive problem on our hands. You can dodge at literally any time in combat. You could be in the middle of an attack animation or even a momentum move, press the dodge button and you will always dodge out of the way. It's a massive savior that makes this game actually possible to play, especially since it introduced one other good thing, which is perfect parries. If you dodge at the very last second and immediately attack back, you'll deal back a critical blow to the enemy, which further incentivizes good and careful gameplay. This is the only critical mechanic that works, but it's also the key foundation keeping this game from having absolutely awful combat. Without this specially made dodge that can be used at any time, I can already tell that this would be one of the worst combat systems in any game that I've ever played. With it though, and the fact that punching enemies is fun, I guess, it goes from dog water to fine. Overworld movement is just as mediocre as I remembered. Without the Knighthood abilities on these characters, it is just one of the worst systems ever. You grapple to a point, jump, land, repeat. It's monotonous, boring, slow, and seriously, what were they thinking? But even with the abilities, it's slow as balls to move around, and this city is frickin' ginormous, so you're better off just using fast travel the moment you unlock it. Or you use one of these single worst vehicles in any game ever made. The Bat Cycle just sucks so much, man, and upon writing this video, I finally figured out why. It's because there's no physics behind it. When you start moving with the Bat Cycle, you will move in a perfectly straight line. No questions asked. You turn, and you will stay on that perfectly straight line. No drifting, no overshooting or undershooting your mark and needing to adjust, no boosting, nothing. It is so fucking boring. Now compare that to the Arkham Knight Batmobile, where you are constantly making tiny adjustments to how you're driving to stay on the track, because the Batmobile has physics. You hit a tiny bump in the road, you're going to be affected by it and need to adjust. You slightly overshoot your turn, you're going to spin out. Undershoot it, and you're going to crash. It's all a delicate balancing act of going fast and not crashing at every second that the Bat Cycle just doesn't have. And a problem that adds on to that is just the fact of how linear the map is. More often than not, you can reach your destination on the Bat Cycle in 3 turns or less, meaning you're going to be going in a perfectly straight line for upwards of a full minute and doing nothing else for most of your drive. And since there's no drifting mechanic that doesn't stop you dead in your tracks, the few times you are going around turns need nothing more than just holding the direction and hoping you make it. And when you compare it to Arkham Knight, where you're going to be taking some kind of sharp turn every few seconds because of how the map was made, it just feels like a whole bunch of nothing. Stealth is a lot like Spider-Man stealth, in that it's easily the worst part of the game because of how little time they spent on it. You've got silent takedowns and ambush takedowns, and that's the extent of your stealth escapades. It's not like stealth even matters at all though, because being seen never means anything bad. You just go straight into combat if you get seen, which in most cases will be a hell of a lot easier because of how quickly you can dispatch of some enemies in this game. There is genuinely never a reason to approach a room with stealth unless the bonus challenge tells you to, because you will finish the room faster and safer by just going ham and beating everyone up, which makes their choice of including a character who specializes in stealth even more confusing. Speaking of though, my character ranking has stayed exactly the same from my initial playthrough all those years ago. Nightwing is still the worst character because his focus is on using his momentum abilities in tandem with other playable characters, which isn't exactly possible when you're playing alone. He's primarily a single target attacker, but doesn't have the damage to back up being so. You'll be dealing pitiful damage to one target at a time, wondering why you aren't just playing Batgirl instead. And speaking of, next is still Batgirl. She's the single target bruiser Nightwing failed to be, and man does she succeed. You will take down enemies with practically no effort using Barbara. She just does that much damage, and does so rather easily as well. The only thing I don't like is that her bonus gimmick is related to hacking. Cause where the hell are you ever going to use it? There are a grand total of 7 sections with security technology in them, which is never hard to get around in the first place because you're given a direct line to the shutdown panel. So just like how Nightwing is only useful in multiplayer, Babs is only useful in these specific sections of already long levels. Silver medal once again goes to Robin. He's more or less just a pest for enemies to deal with, dealing moderate chip damage to multiple enemies at once, and inflicting them with status conditions like there's no tomorrow. He's fast, does respectable damage, and is an all-around good time. But once again, by far the best character is Red Hood. He actually uses the ranged and melee gimmick to his advantage by having combos dedicated to both his fists and his pistols. On top of that, also using the grab gimmick effectively by being able to grab enemies at half health instead of in the red, and getting a much longer throw distance, and having a concussion bomb upgrade added onto that throw that he can then blow up to continue his combo. It actually feels like they put effort into designing this character, because he uses all the gimmicks they included and uses them incredibly well on top of that. Like, I can acknowledge that from an effectiveness standpoint, Batgirl is definitely the best. She tears through combat encounters in seconds with her incredible power, but by God is Jason so much more fun to use. Like I said though, gameplay is pretty much unchanged from my initial playthrough. If anything, it's kinda gotten worse because of how much more detail I've been able to look into it. Like, it still works, it's fun enough to play through, but like, just play Arkham, man.
Hiya, bird brain.
I decided to go out of order a bit and do the story section second, because I have far more to say about it, as you can no doubt see from the rest of this video's runtime. This is partially because I didn't go into nearly enough detail during my initial review of it, because, you know, spoiler free, but also because this is the aspect of Gotham Knights that simultaneously saves and completely ruins it. The story of Gotham Knights can best be described by this scene from Rogue One.
We were on the verge of greatness. We were this close.
Gotham Knights had everything it needed to be successful. Every single piece of the puzzle for a perfect Batman without Batman story was there. But at nearly every single placement of those pieces, someone came in and flipped it upside down. So while all the pieces still fit together and do make a coherent puzzle, you're just left wondering where it all went wrong and why the picture is upside down when you're looking at the finished product. The 3 side missions sound like they'd be a lot more interesting than they are. Mr. Freeze was promised a cure to his condition by Batman, but with Batman gone, there's nobody to hold up to that promise. So he goes on a rampage, with nothing left to fight for since Nora is gone as well. Harley, no longer being brought down by the Joker, uses her knowledge of psychiatry to brainwash a whole army of the most vulnerable in Gotham. Those with nothing else to bring them up turn to Dr. Quinn in hopes of making something of their life, but end up mindless freaks fighting a battle they didn't even know about. And Clayface, having previously fought Batman and seemingly being killed after falling into an industrial fan, reforms himself but has a scrambled memory. He believes Batman intentionally pushed him into the fan and returns to petty crime in hopes of dragging him out to get revenge. Then tries infiltrating the Gotham Reservoir to spread himself across the entire city's water supply. All of these are fantastic baselines for the start of amazing stories with these characters. They're taking what we usually know about them and twisting them in such a way that we aren't used to seeing. Harley isn't working for Joker, Freeze is no longer fighting for his wife, and Clayface isn't just transforming into someone and playing hide and seek. So then why the hell is it all just so freaking boring? Freeze has gone from a horribly tragic villain whose motivations you completely understand because of how evil everyone against him is, to the most generic Saturday morning cartoon villain you could get. He wants to freeze the earth so that everyone can feel like him because Batman couldn't cure his condition. That's an okay motivation and a solid enough start to making a scary villain. A man who feels no emotion because everything has been taken away from him, activating a weapon that could kill millions like is another casual Tuesday. But why does it have to be Mr. Freeze? We're so used to knowing Freeze as the sympathetic villain who we want to root for after learning who tried screwing him over. But seeing as the motivation is Batman unintentionally screwing him over because, you know, he died, I can't gain any sympathy for him. I just don't like it when Mr. Freeze becomes the cold, pun intended, heartless monster he always claimed to be when saving Nora, because it just turns him into another baddie that the Bat fam needs to stop. When he's fighting for the sake of himself or Nora, you want Batman to stop him from going too far, but you also want him to succeed so that Nora is safe. When that motivation isn't present, it just becomes stopping any other villain who happens to have ice powers. It was bad when they did it in the new Batman adventures and Gotham, and it's still bad here. Please stop taking Nora away from Victor and try continuing his story as a villain.
Get away from my storm engine!
What? This piece of junk? Clear out now, or you'll regret it.
Irrelevant! I already have what I need! A storm has risen over Gotham. Nothing can stop it!
You're gonna pay for what you've done here.
The end goal of Harley's plan? Just riot and throw a few parties. That's genuinely all that she and the freaks do. She targeted the most vulnerable people in Gotham and used her psychiatry degree to brainwash hundreds of them so that they wouldn't have any filters, all following her orders and acting on impulse, with no fear of repercussions whatsoever. That is terrifying. And all they do is break a bunch of crap and dance like idiots to really shitty music. She could have created an army that would storm onto Gotham and wreak havoc everywhere they turned. It would have been complete and utter anarchy, allowing Harley to casually slip into a position of power and turn even more people to her side with her crazy inventions. But instead, she just takes over a hospital and does absolutely nothing.
Welcome to my party!
Kind of underwhelming, to be honest.
What? They had the perfect setup for something badass to happen with this character and just did nothing with it. Like, the world isn't in any danger. Hell, the people she's brainwashing aren't really in any danger. The only consequence of not stopping Harley is that these people will stay brainwashed and continue being jackasses in public. That's not a threat. That's an inconvenience for the police needing to do a lot of paperwork.
You must have cheated!
And poor Clayface, man. Finally making it into a game as his own villain. Not just a lackey or Easter egg, even getting to use all of his transformation powers in unique ways. And he gets practically none of the spotlight, pun very much intended. The biggest problem is that Basil doesn't even show up like the other two villains. Harley and Freeze show up as part of the main story, then are sent off to their side quests. Clayface, however, needs to be randomly found in the overworld before his quest can start. The only indication you're given about this quest is a small note on the bulletin board talking about robberies being committed by faceless goons. It doesn't tell you where to find them, what their activities are, or anything like that. It doesn't even show up on your quest screen like every other mission in the game. Instead, you need to be randomly exploring this section of the map and specifically go to crimes with an orange label to start the quest at all. And considering that absolutely nothing of substance happens in this area of the map for any of the other stories, what possible reason would you have for ever going here? On my first playthrough when the game came out, I had no idea that this was how you unlocked Clayface, so I just never got the quest. I played through the whole game never encountering them, because they're in such an inconvenient place. And even when you start the quest, there's practically nothing to do after the fact. It is by far the shortest quest in the game at only 2 missions, and neither of them feel all that interesting. And those 2 quests are way too spread out from each other. You start Clayface's quest in the early game around level 10, but then you can't finish it until the end game at over level 25. Meaning you start this quest at the beginning of the game, have absolutely no content for it in the mid game, and only get more of it by the end game.
Tim, the clay's moving.
It does that sometimes, it's fine.
Tim? Shit! Tim, it went down the drain. Why didn't you warn me? I did.
He totally did.
Guys, get over here!
By then, you'll have completely forgotten about why he was such a big threat, and stopping him is just another day at the office. This would be like getting Captain America at the end of MCU Phase 1, then not seeing him in any movie until Infinity War over 7 years later. By then, you've completely forgotten about this character and are wondering why he suddenly reappeared in a movie that he isn't even related to. And it's especially egregious with how it just so casually ends. You just went through a massive fight with Clayface, beating him down, then going through this long chase through the sewers, only to fight him again in a steel plant. Solid fight, I will give him that. But once you beat him, I'll just let the cutscene speak for itself.
I just wanted to be seen.
I did not do any cuts there. That's really how it ends. One defeat line, then an instant cut to being defeated. Have we forgotten how to end scenes, Gotham Knights? Because, seriously, this is the most unsatisfying end to a villain you could possibly give us. I'm just left wondering what the point of having Clayface is when he does basically nothing the whole time. Like, if we hadn't intervened with Carlo's random robberies, he would have just gone on with his plan of making a Batman slander movie, and there would have been no chance of him ending up in the reservoir. It's only because we intervened that anything of substance happened. And that substance was pretty friggin' boring anyway. I guess we got a few fun fights out of it, but that is not saying much. Definitely the weakest of the already weak side missions.
Gotham will be the perfect backdrop for my next project. I'm sure you'll love it. See you at the premiere.
And of course, how could I forget about the Court of Owls? They were set up as one of the coolest friggin' things ever in the promotional material. This all-seeing secret society with the power to silence anyone at a moment's notice, and we need to both uncover them and take them down? Sign me the hell up! In concept, it's great. In practice, they're the same as every other villain organization ever. So you're telling me that this is supposed to be the longest kept, largest secret in Gotham's history, going back nearly 3 centuries, that still retains control over the city and everyone in it. And what sets us down the path against them? They killed a scientist. And it's just like, they've been killing people for centuries and never got caught. But this one guy somehow led to the dismantling of their entire organization. Okay, you know what? Fine. Whatever. Crazier things have happened in a Batman story. What else happens? Well, we find one of their hideouts, we get caught snooping, we're thrown in a death trap, we escape because we're the friggin' Knights. Repeat. Genuinely, that is all that ever happens in the court storylines. We find a base, learn a bit about the court, get caught, thrown in an incredibly convoluted death trap, escape, repeat. And it always just feels so hollow. Like, great, we're learning a bit about the court. How the hell did nobody else figure this out before us? The story paints the court as this force of nature that even the most powerful in Gotham are too scared to speak about. And yet, when we actually confront them, they're the same as every other criminal faction we've been facing the whole game. Around the halfway point, we uncover the head of the court, and it just feels like nothing. It wasn't this big, obvious twist like the Arkham Knight or anything, but it also wasn't really set up like a twist either. The head of the court is Jacob Kane, a character we've only seen in about 2 cutscenes prior to this point, meaning we have practically no connection to him, and the reveal means basically nothing. It means something to Alfred because he's known Jacob for multiple decades at this point, but he's also the only character that we can't play as, so it doesn't end up mattering. It's played off as this big twist that none of the characters saw coming, but we can't feel the same about it because we know nothing about Jacob at this point, and now he's suddenly the big villain that we need to take down. So when he took off that mask, I just ended up going, oh, okay. Because I felt nothing. And I kept feeling nothing throughout the entire Court of Owls storyline. Because it ultimately meant nothing. By the end of the story, the court is still in power, even after all the work we've done to expose them. The only difference is that a new guy is in power who we don't know the identity of. So we have accomplished nothing.
I gave you a chance back at the orchard, but you failed me like you failed Bruce. Like you failed to save your father.
The worst part about the court, though, is how they end up being treated the same as every other faction in the game by the midpoint. After doing a bit of exposure work, the court ends up appearing in the overworld as a faction whose crimes you can stop. And it's like, why? The point of the court is to operate from the shadows, meaning we shouldn't be hearing people screaming for help, then see a bunch of dudes in owl masks trying to break into a barricaded room. Like, seriously, how much more obvious of a crime syndicate could you be? At least in the early game, you only fight the court on their missions, meaning you only fight them on their home turf. By the mid-game, you're fighting them in the streets, the same as every other random criminal. So despite being this great imposing force that we need to heavily track down just to find one of their bases, we can also randomly imprison members that are just wandering the streets. Isn't the point of their courts that the members are anonymous? And that even a single member being found out as a whistleblower would lead to their execution because of how protective the court is? So we're basically sentencing all of these guys to death when we intervene on their crimes, and nobody has any qualms with that? Okay, sure, whatever. And the even worst part is that by the end game, they aren't even the main threat anymore. After we fight through hell and back to take down Jacob, it finally feels like we've made some progress. The court might actually go down. And then as soon as the cutscene plays of him being walked out, he's shot and the court is no longer the main threat. Because as it turns out, the League of Assassins was working behind the scenes all this time to take over, and were lying in wait for the Knights to help them take down the court, and okay, shut the hell up, game. Seriously, you spent all this time building up the court, making them the main villains of the game, and then just decide last minute that the actual bad guys were just the League of Assassins again? Guys, we've had enough League stories. They've been part of every single Batman story for the last 2 decades. We can try something else for once. They were the ones pulling the strings throughout the entire Arkham saga and the main threat in Arkham City. 2/3 of the Dark Knight trilogy. And in fact, pulled this exact same stunt in the Gotham TV series as well. Literally. Why? They are not that interesting. Can we just ignore them for once? Please? And even when the League takes over the story, they don't really do anything to distinguish themselves from the court. They take on the exact same random crime bullshit when they're supposed to be operating from the shadows. They just kinda do work behind the scenes without any rhyme or reason behind it. And we of course attempt to stop them because bad guys. Like, they create man-bats and fight us with them. And then nothing comes of it. Seriously, the man-bats are introduced in one mission where you're tracking down their research, you fight them in the overworld a few times, then they're never seen again as you track down Talia to reach the finale. What was even the point of introducing them if you weren't going to use them for any significant part of the story? At least the side missions had, story behind them, as quick as they were. The League just shows up for the final half of an act, and we're supposed to pretend that they're the main threat when we spent the entire rest of the game until this point fighting the Court of Owls, who were much more believable threat and had a reason for us to fight them beyond just being the bad guys. Point being, much like every other piece of the story we've talked about so far, the main threats of this game, who we're supposed to fear and struggle taking down, are incredibly generic and mid. As of writing this part of the script, it's only been a few weeks since I played this part of the game, and I've genuinely forgotten most of what they did. I needed to look back through all my footage to remember, and even then I was still confused because they just rushed through everything so quickly.
League attacks. All over the city. It's already started.
The point I'm trying to make with all of this is that none of the villains are interesting in the slightest. And that sucks because of how much potential they all had. Every single faction had the perfect setup to be an awesome story, but it always just went nowhere. Freeze was broken, Harley was acting on her own, Clayface was an amnesiac, the court was finally getting some attention, and every single one of them did nothing with that setup. They simply existed as threats for the heroes to take down because they were the bad guys. You can't get much more boring than that.
It was either you or me. And frankly, it'll always be me.
But what about the good? I've been building up how it's not all bad. There's a shining light of hope that even the biggest haters of this game have to admit is amazing. There is one thing. And that one thing is the Bat family. When Gotham Knights stops being a superhero game and takes a step back to have a look at the family dynamic of Bruce, Dick, Barbara, Jason, Tim, and Alfred, it turns into one of the most heartfelt and deep pieces of comic book media I've ever seen. While I was replaying the game on stream, everyone in chat always got so excited whenever we had a new personal story to watch. For good reason too, because these stories give us what the rest of the game was lacking: character. Each of the knights has a personal story they go through throughout the game, giving each a really powerful character arc and some wonderful interactions with the rest of the family. Nightwing needs to learn that despite not always being there for Bruce, even up and leaving him to go to Bloodhaven, he was never a failure.
I'm proud of you, Dick.
And despite the expectations thrust upon him to take up the mantle of leader in the family, how terrified he is of failure and not being the leader the team needs, he's ready for it. He won't let Bruce down.
I got this, Bruce.
Robin is struggling the most with grief and moving on from Bruce's death.
Then what am I supposed to do?
Try grieving.
While also trying to separate himself from the other Robins and win his own way. He's the youngest of the group, so needs to learn from them and himself. And it's all centered around Bruce's chess set, something he no doubt played with Bruce all the time.
Everything we salvaged from the manor belonged to Batman. I thought we could use a bit more Bruce.
ultimately showing that the best way to move on isn't to cram all your memories away in a corner. Find your own way to grieve. Let the past stay in the past, but don't forget them either.
I like the Rook, actually. It's a protector, and a major piece. But people ignore it. They get distracted by more obvious threats until... checkmate. Plus, castling is basically teleporting.
How unorthodox.
It's how Robin wins.
Batgirl, while I'll admit the execution of the story isn't great, it's actually kinda stupid, the message behind it is still very important. She needs to learn to accept help.
I was Oracle. I had access to every computer system in Gotham. How could I miss something as big as the court?
You aren't perfect in any aspect of your life, even ones you think you mastered years ago. But she can't accept not being perfect and continues to try doing everything herself.
And I have a photographic memory. Where I used to.
So she learns by the end that it's okay to accept help from others, and more importantly, ask for it, even when you think you don't need it. That's especially important for a hero working under Batman, who was so adamant on working alone that it was passed down to all of his prodigies. So learning that you don't have to work alone when you have this amazing support system around you is a great lesson to be taught. While again, it wasn't handled the best in the actual story, and I would have preferred if they did it any other way, it's still a great lesson.
And I won't forget.
And Red Hood. Oh my god, Jason. I just want to give this man a hug and let him cry on my shoulder. Jason still doesn't feel like he belongs in the family. After dying and being revived in the pit that turns everything it touches into monsters, he just accepts that everyone is gonna treat him as such. He doesn't realize that everyone has already accepted him back into their lives, and is doing their best to keep the trauma a part of the past. Jason can't seem to look past it though. Even the slightest misunderstanding sets him off, makes him think that they still believe he's a monster.
I don't know what's worse. Having a chunk of my life taken away from me, or coming back to everyone thinking I'm gonna snap.
He understandably has PTSD of dying and being brought back through the pit, so breaks down at even the faintest memory of it.
It's not stupid. You died. It's okay to not be okay with that.
But through it all, he subtly learns that he isn't the monster he thought he was.
Some days I barely feel human. Let alone a better man.
Tim makes him realize that his rounds are too powerful by stepping right in the line of fire.
If you believe these rounds are safe, then prove it. Shoot me.
An actual monster would have pulled the trigger there just to prove a point.
Fine. Maybe they are a little hot.
But that's not Jason.
Why don't you crunch your numbers and tell me what the best load should be?
He doesn't even feel human most days, even after completely changing his worldview and renouncing the violence he was so adamant about using against criminals. But just one talk with Alfred is enough to convince him otherwise.
He believed in you, and was proud of how far you'd come. Especially after everything you've been through.
Bruce and Alfred knew there was still a shining light in him, even after everything he went through. And when he did finally change, Bruce couldn't have been more proud of him. And that's enough to make Jason just break down and cry. Seeing the tough as nails bad boy stereotype that is Jason Todd break down, grab Alfred, and just start crying is when I knew that the team really understood the characters that they were dealing with. Letting a character cry and not using it as a way to humiliate them is the greatest show of respect that you can give. It doesn't feel wrong to see this like it's out of character. They earn just letting the man cry. Sometimes that's all it takes to completely change someone's way of thinking. A monster wouldn't cry, a man would. And by the end, all we get is the crew making dinner together.
Jason, chop chop. Someone needs to get on those onions.
You can't have a sauce without onions.
That's it. That's the big finale we were building up to with Jason. And it's still enough to make you cry, man. Jason finally realizes that his family never saw him as this horrible monster ready to snap at a moment's notice. They just saw him as another brother, one that may have been gone for a while, but in their hearts, never truly left.
Never really knew what home felt like. But standing in this place, looking over Gotham, yeah, it's okay.
These stories are Gotham Knights' greatest strength. They show an incredible feat of character writing from the team that we just don't get from the rest of the story department. And it's all done during times that the superheroes aren't being superheroes. Unfortunately, they don't really matter. The reason these stories are getting their own section and aren't just lumped in with the story review is because they literally are their own section of the game. They're side content, not required for completing the main game at all. You need to actively stop playing the main campaign in order to access these incredible stories on the side. Meaning, these characters go through no development throughout the main story, instead needing to get their development from a side mission with no gameplay. If this were a truly competent story, the Knights would have gotten their development in the midst of the main story at hand. Dick would have led the team into a trap and needed to prove that he knew how to lead by the endgame, delegating everyone to a specific job he knew they could handle. Barbara would have run into a fight head first only to get overwhelmed, but wouldn't call for backup out of fear that it would make her look weak, but eventually learned that she should call for it when she needs it so she doesn't end up back in her wheelchair. Tim would get compared to the other two Robins before him, thinking that he has no merit in the group, but eventually doing his own thing and putting fear into criminals with new methods. And Jason, we'll get to him later, trust me. But you see the problem I just created? I basically just asked for the 4 Knights stories to be intertwined with the Court of Owls narrative in such a way that everyone would get their time in the spotlight. The problem is that Gotham Knights can't do that. You can't juggle 4 personal stories in the midst of a wider campaign when the player can switch between any of those characters at any time. You can't have the story focusing on Tim when the player has been playing Barbara the whole campaign because it doesn't make any sense. That's why these stories are pushed to the side and not a requirement. Because players are never going to play the way that devs intended. So rather than try precariously balancing 4 stories on top of the overarching plot when they never know who you're going to play, they just leave them for you to experience whenever. It makes sense, but it also makes the story feel bland as hell. Your chosen knight for the story missions isn't going through any character development as you're going through the Court of Owls storyline, because it's meant to all happen in the side stories. And as great as those side stories are, the fact that we get no character development in the actual story means that the audience will have little to no investment in said story. Since you can play every mission as every knight, the team had to make the cutscenes fit every possible character. This means that with the exception of an occasional line tweak or something, every single cutscene will play out nearly identically regardless of which character you're playing as. And because of that, it makes every single cutscene the most generic slop you could imagine. They couldn't make unique interactions for every single character in every single cutscene, because that would literally quadruple their workload in just the writing and cutscene department. So everyone needs to talk exactly the same. Despite being the hothead who's quick to resort to violence, Red Hood approaches everything as calmly as everyone else. Despite being the funny man who makes quips at everything, Dick takes everything as seriously as everyone else. Despite being the kid that nobody takes serious in combat, everyone treats Robin as an adult in the cutscenes. It feels like every cutscene is just us watching Batman again, not the new characters we're supposed to be invested in. And when the point of this game is moving on from Batman and accepting the young blood in his place, without the cutscenes to support it, it just doesn't feel earned. And that's the case with almost every character moment in this game. It's not earned. As great as these personal stories are, they aren't integrated into the main plot, and instead appear out of nowhere. So all the development these characters get means nothing in the grand scheme of the story, and thus isn't earned. All the twists they tried pulling with the court and the league came from nothing and meant nothing. Jacob being the head doesn't impact us at all because he's a nothing character. Talia killing him and the league taking the spotlight doesn't matter because they behave the same as the court anyway. They didn't bother doing any setup for these twists beyond establishing that characters exist, so they don't feel earned. Everyone talked like the Court of Owls is this massive conspiracy that nobody's been able to uncover in years because of how quickly they're able to take out opposition. And yet we uncover them in less than 2 weeks of searching, and they end up acting like every other criminal faction in the game. So this setup for how terrifying they're supposed to be doesn't feel earned. The only thing it feels like they did earn was an honorable end for Batman.
Unlike you, I'm not afraid of dying. I'd rather keep my humanity.
This game gave Batman so much more respect than Kill the Justice League, and it's not even close. Pretty much everyone agrees that if this were how Arkham Batman went out, we'd respect Rocksteady a lot more. This is an incredibly honorable end for the Dark Knight, as he's fighting tooth and nail against Ra's al Ghul, just barely surviving for well over 7 straight minutes in an all-out brawl. It's an amazing fight on its own, but it's also what the fight represents that makes it such an amazing opening. It's Bruce fighting not just for himself, but for the people that he loves. It's revealed later that the only reason this happened was because Alfred was on his first holiday in decades, which Bruce was incredibly insistent on the man taking, and all the other crime fighters were out on their own assignments for the night. It makes me believe that Bruce knew Ra's was coming after him, so sent all of his close family away to keep them out of danger while he dealt with it alone.
No one's coming to help you.
I'll deal with you myself.
The fact that he doesn't call for help until he's already lost shows that off even more. He knows they won't be able to get there in time to help him, so only calls them to be the first ones to the wreckage. He starts the destruction sequence knowing he won't be seeing any of them again, but also knowing that they'll be able to step up to the task of being the next protectors Gotham needs in his absence. He goes out in the most honorable way possible, taking down the greatest visible threat to Gotham as he does it, in a way echoing his sentiment in Arkham City, where he's fine taking a life if he goes down with them. He's ready to break his code and take Ra's life by destroying the cave, but only if it means that he's going out with him. It's a beautiful way to end the character that we technically just met. This isn't a Batman that any of us know or even care about, But this intro makes us care about him and respect him greatly as he fights until his very last breath. And despite the large void that the new Knights need to fill, Bruce is still with them 100% of the way to fill in the cracks. He left them training modules with exactly the words of encouragement they need to hear to stay on track. He left all of his files from old villains and upcoming cases that he never got to finish. He even left one last request to ensure his secret identity would never be revealed, in one of the single funniest moments in any superhero game. Just behold this beauty.
Stop that! Mr. Wayne! You have to leave!
Pure cinema. And despite all the looming that Bruce does across this story, he still doesn't come back. The goal of Gotham Knights isn't to revive Batman and get him back into crime fighting.
When you came back to life, did the Lazarus Pit hurt?
Despite knowing that's a possible route that we could take, what with Jason's mere existence, the Knights never go out of their way to consider reviving Bruce.
Hey, Lazarus isn't gonna bring Bruce back, Tim.
Who's to say he doesn't want us to try?
Because they know that it's not what he would want.
Okay. Bruce isn't this bike. You can't just change everything out and expect things to work like they did.
Bruce is dead, and the Knights need to take up the mantle themselves. They make it very clear that he is gone and will stay that way. So when he is revived in the finale, it doesn't feel like they lied to us or didn't care. It fits with the overarching story. By this point, the Knights have moved on. It's been nearly a month without Bruce by this point, and they've started to accustom themselves to the new norm. As much as they no doubt like Bruce to be back, they no longer need him. Talia, however, hasn't. She's still stuck on Bruce and really wants him back. Against both the Knight's wishes and his own, she brings Bruce back with the Lazarus Pit to use as her own personal servant, sicking him on whichever member of the family happened to find the lair. It is messed up to revive the man whose death kickstarted all of this, only to then sick him on the very people who mourned him most.
Don't listen to her!
The Knights are forced to fight the man who trained them, in essence acting as a final test to show that they're ready in two ways. Ready combat-wise, because if they can beat the man who trained them, surely they can beat everyone else, but also ready to do what it takes. Being able to stand against someone you love and fight them is one of the greatest virtues that a superhero can have. Being ready to do what it takes, even if it might be wrong on some levels. The Knights standing up to Bruce, whom they personally found under the rubble, now breathing in front of them, yet still standing their ground and fighting, is the best showcase of them proving that they're worthy to protect Gotham. And it's still respectful to Bruce's legacy too. He doesn't remain a brainwashed monster that only cares to fight for the enemy. He's able to break through and get one last goodbye with his family, once again sacrificing himself for both the greater good, keeping the Court of Owls from getting a Lazarus Pit, and for the good of protecting his family.
Together you're stronger than the Batman ever could be. I'm so proud of all of you. And I'm sorry.
What are you doing?
You might want to run.
And also while giving one of the most badass speeches a Batman has ever given. Like, this speech is really applicable in today's day and age, and only goes harder the more it's proven that Bruce is right.
Politicians who pander to your reckless demands. Police who hurt the people they're supposed to protect.
Bro calls out exactly what Batman began fighting against during his early years: corruption at the highest levels in Gotham. He goes out fighting the very thing that set him down his path to begin with.
You're not gonna get this Lazarus pit. Because I won't let you.
This right here is what The Last Jedi tried and failed to say with Rose. He flew the Batwing straight into the pit, taking multiple Talons down with him as he did so. He was both fighting those he hated and saving those he loved in doing this final action. He never lost sight of who he truly was in this game, and always went out on his own terms. That right there is respect to the Batman. However, that's not the best Batman moment in this game. I think the thing that really encapsulates what Gotham Knights could have been is the final memory after completing the main campaign. Returning to the Belfry after the credits has this picture hung up next to the Batman Memorial, with all the family together at dinner. We're then shown a flashback to that night from Batman's perspective, where he was recording his death messages, just like we saw at the start of the game. The difference here is that the family interrupts him, and all that really happens is Batman's brooding facade is brought down as the group messes with him a bit.
Really, Dick?
And that's basically it. It doesn't expand the lore, doesn't really tell us anything we didn't know, except that Bruce has a contingency for if he died to Crazy Quilt. It's just there. So why relegate it to essentially a post-credits scene?
Oops. My hand slipped. But now you're up, so let's go.
Because it's just nice. This is the one instance where we get to see the whole family interact, and it ends with one line that sums up everything this game could have been.
You're always looking out for me.
Goosebumps, man. This scene concludes the personal arcs the characters have been going on, and more importantly, finally allows them to move on. Even after having to fight him and watch him die again, the Knights have finally moved on from Bruce. Bruce is one of the best parts of Gotham Knights, despite being dead for the entire runtime. His shadow looms over everything and is constantly influencing the best parts of this story.
If you're watching this, I'm Batman.
And those best parts, coincidentally, also happen to focus on one certain character. A character that, frankly, should have been the focus of this game from the start.
I will not stop fighting until you can.
Gotham Knights should have been a Red Hood game.
If he only knew.
I have no way of confirming this, and frankly it is all speculation, but something in my soul tells me that WB Montreal originally wanted to just make a Red Hood game, but the suits up top told them, no! We need to tie this into a completely irrelevant and awful show that CW is working on, so drop the Jason focus and make 3 new characters and storylines from scratch. And by the way, the game needs to be done before the show that's already 90% of the way through production. Good luck, make us money. Red Hood is the best character in this game in every conceivable aspect, and it's not even close. Jason has the most dynamic and interesting gameplay. He has the most unique traversal option that also ties into his backstory. He has the best personal arc through his story. He has the best actor doing the best performance of the group.
Well, I could tell you a story. It's about being dead, then brought back to life by a pit of mind-altering goo.
And probably most importantly, he has the biggest connection to the overarching story, leading to one of the most succinct finale that hits all the emotional beats and just flat out makes sense from a storytelling perspective.
Hey, look at me. You never gave up on me. I'm not going to give up on you. Bruce, Talia tried to break you with the Lazarus Pit. Remember how you brought me back? You have to fight for it this time!
It's crazy how the finale feels practically tailor-made to just suit Jason and none of the other knights. Talia's big plan throughout all of this was to revive her beloved Bruce using a new Lazarus Pit beneath the Batcave. The pit's mind-altering effect turned Bruce into an unthinking slave to Talia, serving the League at her side. A brainwashed monster being brought back by the Lazarus Pit that could snap at any moment? Doesn't that sound familiar? Perhaps like someone we've been following the whole game through a side story? Yeah, it's literally Jason. The parallel isn't subtle in the slightest, but if they had been able to follow it from the start and just focused on Jason, we could have had something really special on our hands. It just makes perfect sense as a Red Hood game. Jason was killed by Joker and revived by the League, turning him into the vigilante Red Hood. Enter the Under the Red Hood story where Jason eventually gets his revenge on Joker. Despite going against his code, Batman still takes Jason in because he's still the man's son. Jason eventually forgoes killing, as he does in this game, but as soon as he does, the League kills Bruce. The people that revived him have now killed the one man who accepted him even after becoming a killer. Wanting to honor his legacy and pay back the man that brought him in, Jason takes on Batman's last case. He uncovers the Court of Owls, the biggest underground mob in Gotham that even after his early Red Hood activities, he was never able to find. Despite how easy it would be to resort to his violent ways and kill everyone involved, he maintains his new lease on life out of respect for Bruce. All the while, he's struggling to fit back in with the rest of the Bat family. He thinks they still view him as the same monster that crawled out of the Lazarus Pit, so feels like he needs to prove to them that he's changed, even though each and every one of them has already accepted him back into their lives. Uncovering the court would prove that Jason was exactly the man Bruce thought he was capable of being, both a great crime fighter and also a master detective. It would especially make the hallucination scene in the court's labyrinth hit even harder. That scene frickin' rules as is, but putting it in the context of an exclusively Red Hood based game makes it 10 times better. Jason blames himself for Bruce's death, thinking of himself as the worst Robin.
I tried to teach you what I knew, but you were hopeless. Why did I ever believe you to be anything more than a destroyer?
Still considers himself a monster and a killer.
Face it, you can't save anyone, and you never will.
Imagine if we got a scene where Jason starts to embrace it and puts lethal rounds back into his guns, but just before he shoots is able to fight it and return to what Bruce taught him. We could have had that amazing scene if this was a Red Hood game. Embracing what he learns, he fights through the toughest of battles and is able to take down the court the way Batman would have wanted. He doesn't kill the head, instead going through the same justice system Batman always tried, despite knowing that it might fail and set the monster back into the streets. He does it because it's what Batman would have done. But despite all that work he puts into uncovering the court, In the end, it all came back to the League. The League is the reason Jason is here to begin with, the reason Bruce is gone to begin with, and now the reason Batman's last case isn't yet resolved. He needs to take them down to truly finish this. The final confrontation against Talia and Bruce is already tailor-made to fit Jason. Talia is reviving Bruce the same way she revived Jason. The only difference is that Jason had agency when he came out of the pit. Bruce doesn't. He knows exactly what Bruce is going through, so as much as he knows that he has to, he doesn't want to fight him. He continuously tries appealing to Bruce, reaching in to find the man he once knew, even if it might not be there, because he knows it's the only way without killing him again.
You brought me back from the edge, Bruce. Stopped me from killing. Don't you remember?
No! Don't lie!
He has to bring the man back into the light that already did the same for him. And miraculously, he does it. He's able to appeal to Bruce and revert the Lazarus Pit's effects, and Bruce is right back to business, proud of what Jason was able to prove without him there to be his guiding light.
You don't have to prove yourself to anybody. Least of all, me.
But before celebrations can go too far, Talia stabs Bruce again, sending us right back to where we were at the start of the game. The difference is that Jason is here this time, and we're right back to the moral dilemma posed in the court's labyrinth. Will Jason resort to killing Talia? Despite how much he so clearly wants to, out of respect for Bruce, he doesn't.
For his sake, Talia, I'm not gonna kill you. But this is gonna hurt you a lot more than it will me.
He lays into Talia until the court appears and stalls the fight, showing that even if Jason had killed the head, it wouldn't have mattered, because they have a new voice only a few days later and are still as strong as ever. They're going to take the pit and kill the two fighters. So in the end, Bruce is the one to stop everyone. He doesn't need to come back to life. He knows that Gotham is in good hands with Jason and the rest of the Bat family watching over them. Even if the court gets away and has a new leader, they'll slip up eventually, and they don't need Batman to step in, because they have new protectors now, ones he's proud to have trained and called his family. It's hard for Jason to accept. He already lost Bruce once, so seeing him back only to almost immediately return to the grave is rough. But he knows it's the only way, so gets out while Bruce does what he needs to do. Knowing that the court will try to cover up what happened, he springs into action and relays a message to all of Gotham, standing up as their new protector, moving on from what he did in the past to give the city a new symbol of hope to look to in the absence of Batman.
I will find every last one of them and bring their crimes to light.
Guys, seriously, Gotham Knights was meant to be a Red Hood game. I think it's really telling that Jason is the only knight to have individual story scenes with every member of the family, followed by an ensemble of them all. He gets the chance to bond with everyone individually, followed by all together, wrapping up his arc perfectly. The other three miss out on at least one character or only have ensemble meetings, meaning they end up missing that critical connection that Jason gets in his. I could believably see Jason's taking place after every few missions while the group is just relaxing at the Belfry, because they're all really simple scenes that don't require a lot of setup. Jason's working in the kitchen, he's doing some target practice, he's playing a game, he's reminiscing with Alfred. All of these are perfectly reasonable setups to mix in with the main story that all flow perfectly naturally. They just had to split them up into the side story because they had to do it with every other night. Barbara's and Dick's don't work the same way because they're focused on entirely different subplots and require them to go to specific places when the plot didn't ask for it outside the Belfry. And Robin's has him getting an item from a location that you can't even access in the game, so his is off the table as well. It's clear that Jason was the one they wanted to focus on just based on how these stories play out. And even from a gameplay perspective, this game feels like they were trying to focus exclusively on Jason. He's essentially the only knight that gets meaningful combat upgrades across his entire skill tree, and is really the only one to make use of both melee and ranged attacks, since his combat revolves around his guns. The others pretty much just have ranged weapons because they needed a ranged attack. Meanwhile, Red Hood relies on his combination of both to succeed in combat. Furthermore, he's the only character to get an upgrade to his grab abilities, which is a system I talked very heavily about in the gameplay section, and it makes it feel like the system was only implemented for him specifically. Like, oh, if Red Hood can grab enemies, surely the others need to as well, no matter if the whole system sucks without any upgrades. Also, more than half of the bosses in this game are large creatures that take pitiful damage from melee attacks. And you know who specializes in ranged combat?
Red Hood.
Clayface, Mr. Freeze, Man-Bat, and more all feel so much easier with Jason because of his enhanced ranged combat. Mr. Freeze 1 especially is most guilty of this, because this fight has him resisting melee attacks and jumping all around the arena, almost like he was made with Jason fighting him in mind. The lacking stealth mechanics for all the characters would have made a ton of sense if this was just Red Hood, because he doesn't exactly do stealth like Batman would have. His motto is,
Anyway, I started blasting. Bang! Bang!
So it would make a ton of sense that he just wouldn't bother going into stealth in most circumstances. Why bother with much more than quiet takedowns and ambushes? We all know you're gonna focus on blasting in the end anyway. Every little thing in Gotham Knights points to the idea that this was meant to be a Red Hood game. The story, the gameplay, the character interactions, and everything in between just puts such a hard focus on Jason that it can't not be the case. Again, I have absolutely no proof of this one way or the other, but if someone can get me in touch with the lead designer on Gotham Knights, I feel like I could get an answer.
Already hate this guy as much as the last one.
Take heart. Your death has purpose. You die, so the court lives forever.
You want this Lazarus pit? You go through me.
Go! Deal with that vermin.
When I think of the Justice League, I think of Wonder Woman, Superman, Green Lantern, Batman. You don't want to mess with that lot.
So, the big question that's on everybody's mind, and I've been more or less alluding to this entire video. Did perhaps we treat this game too harshly? Is it actually better than Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League? Well, in my opinion, no. I think that Suicide Squad is the better of the two games, but by only the slimmest of margins, because of one simple thing: gameplay. Great or even good gameplay can make up for a mid or even flat out bad story. Look at almost every Mario game. Their stories are non-existent at worst to boring and unengaging at best, and yet their gameplay completely makes up for it by the simple fact of existing. Unfortunately, the opposite is not always true. You need an exceptional story to make up for lacking gameplay. Just having something above average or even good isn't gonna cut it if the gaming experience you provide isn't fun to keep playing. You need Super Paper Mario, Red Dead Redemption 2, Doki Doki Literature Club levels of writing to get away with mid or non-existent gameplay. And Gotham Knights doesn't provide that. What we have is the most generic superhero story you could possibly get, with only small hints of greatness sprinkled in at the times that don't matter. So what you end up with is ultimately a mid-story with mid-gameplay, leading to the overall experience being mid. Suicide Squad, on the other hand, the story is flat out atrocious. Even after all the DLC has come out and remedied some of the blatant disrespect they did to these characters, it's not good in the slightest. However, the gameplay is still good. I would much rather pick up and play Suicide Squad than Gotham Knights any day of the week, because it at least feels like something is happening. The unique traversal options, solid gunplay, and overall power trip that Suicide Squad provides is just so much more engaging than any piece of gameplay that Gotham Knights provided. And that fun gameplay, in my opinion, makes up for the shitty story, at least to the point where I can enjoy my experience enough to keep playing. The simple fact that I went back and continued to play Suicide Squad while never going back to play Gotham Knights after 2 years should summarize how I felt playing both games. So while the comparison isn't really fair, since these are two wildly different games, if I were forced to play either of these again after making this video, I'd go back and re-kill the Justice League in a heartbeat. So, what's the final say I have on Gotham Knights? It is still, truly, one of the games of all time. There were cutscenes that told a story, which surrounded combat-based gameplay that I played, and put together in an engine that made the game truly function. It is the most mid-game I have ever played. There's so much to talk about, but so little to say about it. Every single aspect of this game was on the verge of greatness. It was this close, but just one wrong move made everything spiral out of control, and what we're left with still does function as a gaming experience, but one that is so unmemorable that I had to go back to my footage so many times to make sure I remembered everything I needed to talk about while writing this script. And even after all that reviewing, the only things I really had to say about it were, unfortunately, new complaints. Gotham Knights tried too much and just couldn't live up to any of it. So I leave this review feeling exact same way about it as I did 2 years ago. A perfectly average 7 out of 10. We did not treat this game too harshly. We gave it exactly the amount of respect it deserved. I probably won't replay it anytime soon, and frankly, I wouldn't blame any of you for feeling the same way. With that in mind, do all of the YouTube stuff, because we really don't need Batman to keep dying, guys. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you later, chaps.